What's the potential fantasy impact of picks 21 through 32 in the 2024 NFL Draft? We break it down, our latest mock, part 3, as we begin another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your fantasy football team every day. I'm one of your co-hosts to Locked On Fantasy Football. I'm Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL fantasy betting, draft, free agency, all that good stuff here for sportingnews.com. I'm going solo again this week with my co-host, Michelle Madzuk, on vacation. I'll be out next week, so setting the table for you for the 2024 NFL Draft, going through my latest mock draft for Sporting News. We've gone through parts 1 and part 2. That means we're through picks 1 through 20. So if you missed those shows, check them out. The potential fantasy impact of all those decisions there for those teams. Today's show, we're going to focus on 21 through 32. What teams might do on the clock there on April 27th that could really affect us in fantasy football and what they might be thinking offensive skill-wise there for the first round. This episode, Locked On Fantasy Football, is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. All right. At number 21, we have a potential for the Dolphins here, and they need some help at wide receiver. They could think about a wide receiver. It might come later in this class because they're pretty deep. They did lose Cedric Wilson. He signed with the Saints in free agency, so they need maybe a third wide receiver in that mix. They did explore Odell Beckham Jr., but we know he's not always the most reliable guy. So then you have Tyreek Hill, Jen Waddle, and needing that third target. They really didn't upgrade tight end too much. They got Jonnu Smith out of the Falcons when he was released. So again, the Dolphins could explore their offense a little bit, but they also did lose a big-time playmaker defensively, Christian Wilkins, who signed with the Raiders in free agency. So that's where we're leaning with the Dolphins. There's two guys that you look at the position that really stand out in this year's class. You look at Texas prospect Byron Murphy. He's really good at disrupting things inside. And then Johnny Jerzan Newton there from Illinois. Those are the two guys you look at. So we'll actually kind of do picks 21 and 23 here and then come back to 22 with the Eagles in the middle. So the Dolphins have a need there. The Vikings are now on the clock at 23 with their second first rounder as they made a deal with the Texans who acquired that pick from the Browns. So these are the two teams that are most likely to take a defensive tackle who can disrupt things. And this is not insignificant. The Dolphins have some potential here with Anthony Weaver, the former Ravens standout defensive tackle, now being their defensive coordinator. So a lot of changes with all these teams. It's really, the Dolphins had some potential there with their front. It's kind of interesting because Vic Fangio and Brian Flores are now working for the other teams, the Eagles and the Vikings. The Dolphins have moved on there with the Weaver. So they all kind of have similar needs with their defense. I think you also could think about corner. The Dolphins did recover pretty well at corner. They're making a move to get Kendall Fuller. So they have someone there without Xavier Howard. The Eagles have two older corners, so you look at them. The Vikings really could use an impact defensive tackle for Flores after they really invested at edge rusher there with Jonathan Gennard, Andrew Van Ginkel. They also had Blake Cashman, I should say, as their linebacker. So when you look at the Vikings and Dolphins, maybe similar needs. So I think this is the landing spots here for Murphy and Newton, the two best defensive tackles, pure guys that you can look at inside in any front on the board here. So I think Dolphins, I think Murphy more profiles like Wilkins, so they should go in that direction. The Vikings just need a boost up front as well for Flores, who's really built his front seven middle second level well. So I think that's how you look at it. So these two defenses are sleepers here to make some plays because, again, I think Flores is just going to have a lot of impact on the Vikings. They overachieved last year. Now they actually have some real personnel at every level. So maybe a sleeper fantasy defense there. Vikings have had plenty of offense here early, right? I mean, they used a pick to get TJ Hawkinson. They have Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson, 2 first-rounders at wide receiver, and Christian Darrisaw. So it makes sense for them to go defense and the Dolphins as well, and then look into that wide receiver depth. The Vikings did lose KJ Osborne, much like the Dolphins lost Wilson. So Dolphins and Vikings there at 21 and 23 should be thinking about wide receiver later. Now let's go to the middle here with the Eagles. We mentioned corner. I think Quinion Mitchell out of Toledo makes a lot of sense for them. They need to upgrade the defensive playmaking there for Fangio. So another defense we have on the radar for fantasy that could rebound. They've already been a pretty good pass rushing unit. They brought back Brandon Graham. They have Hassan Reddick here. They also have what they can disrupt inside with Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis. So there's some real nice potential for this Eagles defense to come through and really kind of benefit from the Fangio influencers. They blowed up with Fangio on defense. And then on the other side, you have Kellen Moore leading the offense. So Kellen Moore may lobby for something here. They did go get Saquon Barkley in free agency, so they don't need a running back or invest in one too early in this draft. Wide receiver, again, this is a team that doesn't really have a third consistent option behind Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown, much like these other two teams, right? I mean, you have Jefferson and Addison, you've got Waddle and Hill. So third wide receiver should be in play for all three of these teams, just not in this particular round. So let's also get to picks 24, 25, and 26 here. So looking at it, and we will get to 26 there in a moment in our next segment. But the Cowboys and Packers are on the clock here at 24 and 25. And what you consider with what they're doing, offensive line is a big need for the Cowboys. Tyler Biadasz, their center, left in free agency. And you also have a concern. Zach Martin is 33. Tyron Smith was not retained here. So their best offensive linemen right now are Martin, who's still plugging away at 33, and Tyler Smith, who's out there, and Terrence Steele they also like at right tackle. So it makes a lot of sense for the Cowboys to upgrade this offensive line here and to really help Dak Prescott and their running back TBD that is not Rico Dowdle. They will look at a running back later in the draft after losing Tony Pollard in free agency to the Titans. So the Cowboys really need to think about that. That will come later. Maybe they look at a Braylon Allen of Wisconsin, who's a big power back in an upcoming round here. But in this first round, I think they have to go interior. There's two really guys that stand out at those positions. That's Troy Fautanu, they're of Oregon, but the number one guy on the board for me is Jackson Powers Johnson. Very good interior lineman and has really looked dominant in the pre-draft process. I think the Cowboys really need to go there and get him. If they didn't go there, they could think about offensive tackle and think about their region in Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma. I think he'd be a really good fit for the Packers. They just got Josh Jacobs to upgrade their backfield. They, of course, have Jordan Love at quarterback. So David Bakhtiari was let go. So interesting. We won't see Tyron Smith and David Bakhtiari, two long-term stalwart tackles that have been to Pro Bowls, won't be that out there for their teams. The Cowboys are, of course, picking ahead of the Packers because they lost there. So when you look at that combination, the Cowboys are going to have the first crack, but I think they go interior because I think Powers Johnson is just that good. And then Guyton, again, he got attention immediately for his frame, but then athleticism really stood out. So interesting run of tackles here. Defensive for the Dolphins and Vikings at 21 and 23. And then you look at 25 for the Packers. The Cowboys going interior line there with Powers Johnson. The Eagles going a little different direction with Quinion Mitchell there at corner. And again, these teams are all going to think about depth and offensive considerations later, but not in this particular spot for skill players. So we'll get into the next picks there. We'll look at picks 26 through 29 in my mock draft in there and what these teams could be thinking, starting with the Bucks there, going through the lines. And we'll close looking at the top three teams, the Ravens, 49ers, and Chiefs, what they could do from picks 30 to 32 and complete our look at my latest mock draft for Sporting News. Say goodbye to your busted brackets through the Sweet 16 because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament, whether you're betting on a big upset still coming up here, maybe one of the top teams will still go down, or you're counting on the one seeds to come through, whether it's Purdue or North Carolina or Houston or UConn to do what they're supposed to do in this next couple rounds in the regional finals. It's time to go dancing with America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. And it gets more interesting now that you have fewer options, different odds you can explore there with some of the Cinderellas and maybe some sleeper teams lingering still in the bracket. So all kinds of things to consider that. FanDuel, just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets at the Final Four in Phoenix. All right, before we continue the show, I do have to tell you about something exciting on the network. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. All right, 26 on the clock would be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as it stands right now. They did bring back Mike Evans. They did bring back Baker Mayfield. Now they need to maybe get some defensive help. They traded Carlton Davis, who'd been a long-time big corner there for them. Previously in the offseason 2023, Sean Murphy-Bunting was gone, so they need help here on the back end for Todd Bowles' defense. So I love this name, and I loved him in college football because of this. Kool-Aid McKinstry. He looks like he's going to be fully healthy and good to go. Yeah, you need some Kool-Aid. If you're in Tampa, it's hot down there, even in September and October. So Kool-Aid, getting him into the conversation and getting him at corner to replace Carlton Davis makes a lot of sense. They did bring back Lavonte David, but they did say goodbye to Devin White, their linebacker, who went to the Eagles. So Eagles don't have a real need at linebacker. So McKinstry, however, makes more sense to get an attack here over Peyton Wilson out of NC State, who's a very active linebacker in coverage, and Edrin Cooper out of Texas A&M. So those could be considerations here for the Bucs. They could target them later in the draft if they're available, but there's pretty good linebacker depth. McKinstry kind of fits into the mold of the other corners we've seen here in this first round. We had Nate Wiggins go earlier. We had his teammate Terrion Arnold out of Alabama, Quinion Mitchell we talked about. So there's some good defensive backs, elite talent here to get in on their early. So McKinstry can be a playmaker right away and really help the defense of the Bucs have a lot more takeaways. So McKinstry is someone that it makes sense here. Now, we'll go back to offense with pick 27, and we mentioned Troy Fautanu there of Washington being right up there with Jackson Powers Johnson. Some see him as an offensive tackle where it makes sense a lot for the Cardinals. They did sign Jonah Williams, the former Bengal, as they did cut DJ Humphreys finally. They did, however, use a first-round pick on an offensive tackle, Paris Johnson Jr. in last year's draft. Earlier, we know they got Marvin Harrison Jr. in this mock draft at number 4 to help them at wide receiver, give them a true number 1. Now I think they could work on the interior offensive line, get an athletic blocker to help James Conner and Kyler Murray. And Fautanu would fit that bill here. I think the 49ers would jump on him if Fautanu would somehow last all the way to 31. So Ardo should know that. I think he fits their scheme very well and just gives them a little bit more athleticism up front and some versatility. If they feel like Paris Johnson Jr. needs to be moved around and they need to see what he can do on the other tackle, they could look at Fautanu there at a tackle as well. So all kinds of options here, much like a lot of players in this draft that have dual ability here inside and outside, and I do have the Ravens taking one of those players at 30. So the Ravens, 49ers there, 30-31, are also going to be thinking about Fautanu should he fall to that spot. Now, this next pick, 28 to the Bills, Going back to offensive skill, I've kind of tied the Bills to this player for quite a while here. And let's look at the Bills offseason. They didn't re-sign Gabe Davis. They let the Jaguars do that and bring him in as a free agent. They did add Curtis Samuel, which was an interesting move given they have some short area receivers, right? I mean, they have two tight ends there, Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, James Cook is a good receiver out of the backfield. And they had Khalil Shakir, who's a developing slot potential option to be regular and be a big impact receiver for Josh Allen. So it was interesting they added Curtis Samuel. Again, short area guy, pretty good red zone work. He's a volume-based guy. He's one of those guys that you saw with the Commanders, maybe have 10 catches on the 12 targets for 100 yards. So it's just shorter area passes that he caught from Sam Howell. He cashes in with the Bills, but I still don't think that meets their need to fill the void of Davis here as a big-time field stretcher. So Brian Thomas Jr. can do that. He's 6'4". He's lanky here. We'll explore him a little bit more and what he can do as we look at the wide receiver class here on Friday's show that isn't in the top three. So, but I do like him quite a bit. I mean, he's not too far off his teammate from college, Malik Neighbors, is kind of what developed before with the Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. I don't think they're both at that level combined, but Brian Thomas Jr. is a very nice target here, and he would fit perfectly here with what Josh Allen can do because he's a big arm. He also could transition to being the new number one go-to guy in time here. Should they move on from Stephon Diggs or move him, or next year he's gone? So Brian Thomas Jr. in Dynasty also has a lot of value here for you because, again, he fits the profile. I know big receivers haven't always come through. Speaking of Gabe Davis, that we've seen some smaller receivers that are more technically sound route runners can get around, be versatile. But Thomas can do that. He's just in a big package here. You can also play the big slot here, which is helpful. So if they want to put Shakir outside, they have a lot of versatility here in the relatively new offense of Joe Brady, who took over from Ken Dorsey in the middle of last year. Now, Lions have been tied to Brian Thomas and other wide receivers here all of a sudden. Maybe there's some doubts about Jameson Williams. Will he live up to the expectations now as a first-round pick? He had the injury-riddled start to his career, but he definitely has some upside to stretch the field. He's a very speedy guy, so I don't think the Lions are going to force themselves into taking a wide receiver early, especially when this class is rather deep here. They don't really have any glaring needs. When can you say that about the Lions? Probably not since a long time, but they've taken care of a lot of big needs here under Brad Holmes. So they're in a position to go a little bit luxury. I think there is one necessity that they could add to, and that's the pass defense. And that could be getting a pass rusher for Aiden Hutchinson or looking at someone on the back end here. At the right corner falls, they could go in that direction. But I think they have some nice options here as they kept working on their secondary. So I think the thing they're missing is that consistent player opposite Aiden Hutchinson. Right now, they have Marcus Davenport in the mix, the former Saint and Viking. So he's there, but I don't know if he can hold up as well. He can be productive, but I think he's more of a situational pass rusher. I've always seen him do that. So they have a choice between two Robinsons. I'm going to go with Chop Robinson out of Penn State. I think he fits what the Lions want to do very well. He can go from the Nittany Lions to the Honolulu Blue Lions here and make that transition. So this Lions defense under Aaron Glenn could be really special this season. You got Jack Campbell running around on the second level. Their secondary is also capable of making more big plays here. So if you get it going here with their front and Hutchinson getting going here with someone on the other side, we could have something developed to what we saw with Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard in Cincinnati. So that's what we're kind of looking for, to get some playmaking with this Lions defense. And they've been able to keep their staff intact, including Aaron Glenn. So Chop Robinson here to the Lions, going defensive minded, but they will, I think, address wide receiver for some depth, some extra pop there, and contingency should Williams not live up to the expectations there. So there's something to look at later in the draft for the Lions. They will get a receiver that we're going to pay attention to in this class. We're down to, again, the last three picks. Those belong to the Ravens, 49ers, and Chiefs, the best teams from last season. We'll break those down for you next. We told you at the top, this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by the Game Time app. And look, if you're looking for last minute deals on tickets, and it could be anything that you're going to, it could be a big sporting event. We know March Madness is going on. We know some other things are happening. Maybe you're going to check out a soccer game as we go forward, or you're looking at a concert that's coming. Summer concert tours are coming up here as well. Whether you're looking at those things or a comedy show, Game Time has got you covered with the last minute tickets you're looking for. You can look for flash deals, zone deals that pop up. So it's very easy to just say on a whim that I want to go to this, and Game Time has got you covered even on the day of the event. It's easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area. You can check out views from all the seats in the venue before you purchase, and you can also be rest assured that you'll get the lowest price guaranteed, event cancellation protection, and job loss protection, all the things that we're looking for when we invest in getting some good tickets here. So check it out there at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account and redeem with the code Locked On. That's spelled out Locked On, LOCKEDON, to get $20 off your first purchase. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, let's look at the last three picks in my mock draft. Again, if you missed the analysis of picks 1 through 10, we had a lot of quarterbacks go off the board there. And what I also looked at from 11 through 20, check them out on the previous shows. And it's just part 3. And tomorrow we'll turn our attention to looking at the top 3 wide receivers. So we'll give you a little bit of a breakdown scouting report there for the consensus top 3: Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze, and seeing what their prospects are, their landing spots, and their future in this league for reality and fantasy football. So I'll be excited to break those guys down for you. Now, 3 more picks that we need to get through. We're looking at pick 30 belongs to the Baltimore Ravens. And right now, they need some offensive line help. Kevin Zeitler did not return here. They moved on from Morgan Moses there, so they're looking for some help. Ronnie Stanley did come back at left tackle. So you're looking at Graham Barton. He's a guy at Duke. We talked about the versatility that you could get from Troy Fautanu. I think he has a little bit more guard dominant potential. I think Graham Barton is more of a swing player out of Duke. So the Ravens need that type of player. He could play left guard. He could play right tackle. Those are usually correlated positions because the way that you count on run blocking. And Barton is a very technically sound blocker. He can play on either part of this offensive line. You want the Ravens to keep their offensive line intact without Zeitler and Moses. You want to have them be pretty strong here because they were a very good running team. We know last year, Lamar Jackson expanding from that and now having Derrick Henry. And then you look at the pass protection, trying to get things short up there for the inside so they can push the ball downfield to Zay Flowers. So Graham Barton gives them that versatility. The Ravens like that type of player. I think the 49ers would be a little jealous at 31 if Barton goes off the board, but I think the Ravens have a real need at corner now. Actually, the pick that I have for the 49ers at 31 could be a little bit interchangeable with what the Ravens are looking at as well. They need some cornerback help and some youth and depth there. But the 49ers did move on from Isaiah Oliver. They have Ambry Thomas, who really struggled in the slot last year. They do have Travarius Ward, who's a pretty reliable corner, the former Chief. But Yamador Lenoir is okay. He's not bad, but I think you could look for an upgrade all around in coverage here. This was one of their weaknesses of the defense. They really loaded up on depth in the pass rush in free agency. So this is a chance to look at the secondary. They should be okay at safety with Talanoa Hufanga coming back. So cornerback is a question mark. So Ennis Rakestraw Jr., I think, fits really well into their defensive scheme. Yet again, the 49ers are switching their scheme. So need a little bit of pop there with their coordinator. So Rakestraw is a very good player. He can get around and cover a lot of ground. So the 49ers, again, for now, are sitting on Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, and no trades there as of now. So interesting that they're just trying to get the most out of them while you have the Brock Purdy deal being low. They can't do anything with Brock Purdy until early next year. So there's no extension coming because he's a 7th round pick under contract. You can't do that here until next year. So the 49ers are locked into one more cheap year with Purdy, and Purdy has got to settle with that. So why not maybe just keep Ayuk and Samuel, try to run it back at least for an NFC championship. So again, if you have those things in place, George Kittle is there, Kyle Juszczyk restructured his contract, Christian McCaffrey's in good shape here. I think they're just going to go for it here. So that tells me just get a potential impact player on defense and not really force the offense here. An offensive line is what they would look at here, but they did keep things intact for Colton McKivitz opposite to Trent Williams at offensive tackle. So they're not going to be desperate. I think one position they could look at again, guard, if Powers Johnson or Fautanu or Barton were there. I think the 49ers would have to think about that a little bit more. But here, corner makes a lot of sense for the 49ers if they're going for a defensive position early versus offense. And finally, the Chiefs. Now, remember, we've been tying the Chiefs a lot. Oh, they got to get a wide receiver. They got to get a wide receiver. They've cut Marquez Valdez-Scantling. They got Rashee Rice, but what else do they have? Sky Moore has been a disappointment. Kadarius Toney, and we need some help here. Justin Watson's not going to get it done as a primary deep threat. But then, well, I've got Marquise Hollywood Brown, so they're not as desperate, right? When you have Rashee Rice and Hollywood Brown. And again, we talked about many times how deep this wide receiver class, and we'll get into that here and do some rapid fire and all the options behind the big three on Friday's show. So all things you have to consider here with the Chiefs, and I think the bigger thing for them is getting offensive tackle help. Right now, Wanya Morris would be their left tackle, and he's got some potential, but we know Jawan Taylor was very disappointing at right tackle. Donovan Smith came over from the Bucs. They were able to manage that and win the Super Bowl there despite the downgrade or maybe lateral move from Orlando Brown Jr. at left tackle at best. So now you're thinking about offensive tackle for the Chiefs, and Kingsley Sumaia is a player I really like here out of BYU. He's really risen up boards. He's a very athletic dude. Now, he may not have the bulk of a Jalen Guyton, who went earlier. He's a smooth, athletic pass protector, however. And the Chiefs, we know, have knocked it out of the park when drafting offensive linemen. Wide receivers, not so much. So they might want to go more in this direction. Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith were great finds, right, for their offensive line. Just astute draft picks. They were able to just let guys go, bring in others. So they did have to throw some money. That probably was ill-advised at tackle, switching from Brown to Taylor, trying to take a flyer on Donovan Smith. So this gives them a chance to build their own tackle. We know they've used a number one overall pick on a tackle before. It was in 14 with Eric Fisher. He was very good for a while, but now they need to maybe go back to that well in the first round. And Kingsley Sumaia from BYU is a very good player, again, that would fit their scheme very well. Potentially looking at a left tackle. You might explore Jawan Taylor there. You might look at competition, but I think going for a left tackle, I mean, you've just invested a lot of money in Patrick Mahomes. Why not keep him upright and let him throw the ball downfield a little bit better so he's not always having to scramble, improvise, go behind his back and extend and make big plays. Be nice to keep him a little bit cleaner, go back to doing that here in their offense. So that's a look at all now 32 picks of my latest first-round mock draft. I will have a 7-round mock draft that you can check out there at Sporting News. So, yeah, we can look at all the picks through all the rounds and see where all the potential offensive skill players go, and that'll be up here soon that you can check out early next week. But that's a sneak peek at my first round and what you're going to get here and what the teams might be thinking offensive skill-wise, defensively, what's going to impact fantasy football here. That's what we did. So thanks so much for checking out the mock draft. Again, tomorrow we'll come back, look at some future scouting reports here for Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, and Roma Denze, the consensus top 3 wide receivers in the draft. For this edition of Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer. See you.